There is no justification for kidnapping an 8-month-old baby kafir from his mom.
I can't find a single civilization in history that has turned against its Jewish people and then thrived. Every time there's intolerance towards these people, you people, the descendants of prophets, something changes.
I'm proud to be from a country that actually banned Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is the armed forces of Muslim Brotherhood.
Once we have that genuine recognition in Israeli society that it is a country founded on faith and scripture, then what you have is the language with which to speak to the rest of the region. Suddenly Muslims will realize the truth, that is, these are the children of Israel, the children of Yaqub. These are children who are coming home. I mean, by the way, what is Zionism? Zionism is predicated on Judaism.
As Josh said, we have two very special guests join with us tonight. And I want to tell you briefly about them, and then we'll invite them up onto the stage. So, first of all, Ed Husain. Ed Husain is a writer, academic, and commentator on Islam, the Middle East, and international affairs. He's a senior fellow at the Civitas think tank. He's the author of The Islamist and Among the Mosques. He's advised governments and institutions worldwide on extremism and global geopolitics, and has himself been on a journey from extremism towards enlightenment, religious enlightenment. He's also a professor in foreign relations at Georgetown University. And Ed has been a leading voice in promoting Islamic-Jewish reconciliation. We're also joined by Amjad Taha. He's an Emirati political strategist and analyst who has been providing advice to various institutions in the Middle East on Islamism. Frequently, he appears on both Arab and Western media, including CNN, Fox News, Newsweek, The Guardian, and many more. He is a huge online voice, in case you weren't already aware of him, which I'm sure most people in this room already are. He's got over 2 million followers online and is a staunch voice against anti-Semitism in the Arab world. And more important than any of their CVs or social media following or whatever there is as well that's very impressive about these men, what makes them so outstanding, as Josh said, is that they're prepared to stand up and go against the tide of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish feeling, and they've shown bravery to forge a new path in a world that is scared of speaking uncomfortable truths. They are two moral heroes who have chosen to do just that, to stand with us and to actually stand up and speak the truth and show incredible bravery in doing so. So please will you give them an extremely warm welcome.
You're going to go first.
So this might take a while.
It takes a while because manners are that the guest goes first. And the guest that is dressed closer to the Prophet's attire has priority. But this guest has better manners than I do, so he managed to force me.
I don't feel like guest here. I feel at home.
Great. Well, you should both feel extremely at home here tonight, and we're extremely honoured to have you both here and to really learn from you and your insights. The way we're going to do the format for tonight is I want to speak to you both about a number of topics, and then I'll throw it out to audience questions. And the way I thought that I'd divide up the discussion is to start with the negative and then talk about the positive. So let's start with the negative and dive right into it. So when I refer to the negative, of course, I'm referring to ongoing conflict that we're seeing in Israel and surrounding Arab countries, and of course, the whole Israel-Palestine issue itself. October 7th was, I think for a lot of people, it's become a bit of a turning point in their mind, but also politically in the world, just generally around this whole Israel-Palestine issue, which has been going on now really for almost 100 years, because it revealed certain uncomfortable truths, and it's forced many people to rethink the whole issue of how we get towards peace. So I want to ask both of you, what's been your thought journey? What are some of the conclusions that you have drawn from October 7th and its aftermath? And I thought maybe, Ed, I'd start with you on that.
Please.
It's going to really take a while. I'm going to be forceful here and just say, Ed, please go for it.
I think the first thing to begin is in the beginning, which, we're in the house of God here, and to begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which is to say that we begin in the name of God, who is most compassionate, most merciful. For those of you who have Hebrew, you will know Ar-Rahman is a God, the name of God that we use in Arabic, but it's also a name that you use in Hebrew. one of the accusations against the Prophet Muhammad very early on, when he called us to surrender to the one God of Abraham, the one God of Jacob, his children, Joseph, and all the way down to Moses, Ismail, Ishaq. All of these names I know because they're in the Quran. So when the Prophet Muhammad's opposition said to him, who is your God? And he would say, Ar-Rahman, i.e. from the word Raham, the womb, which women have, and therefore they're superior to us because they are able to give life in a way that we're not. So that's the name of God, and the same one God that we all believe in. I think it's worth recognizing that, especially in the house of God, and we share that common theme. October 7th was doubly painful because I was in Israel on the night of October 7th. And I was in Israel not because I'm Jewish, far from it. I'm very proud of my roots and my faith and my commitment to the one God and to the Ishmaelite and Ishaqi line of prophets. But why was I in Israel? Because I think Israel, for today's Muslims, is a sanity test. In other words, can we recognize and live side by side with our Jewish neighbors as God calls us to do? And I was in Israel because many years ago I had a moment on television debating with a guy who I had no idea was going to come on the other side, and it turned out his name was Naftali Bennett, and I was on CNN in America debating and discussing with him, and I'd never been to Israel, yet I felt the confidence and the cockiness really to kind of take on who was then Bibi Netanyahu's chief of staff. And I made the mistake of assuming that I knew more about Israel than he did, having never visited Israel. So, a friend of mine phoned me and used expletives and said, "What gives you the right to talk about a country and a people who you've never visited? And if you were invited, would you go?" And I took up that invitation and I went to Israel. And as a result, I fell in love with something in Israel that I can't exactly pinpoint. But there's something there, there's a spirit, there's a passion, there's a commitment, there's a cause, there's a love, there's a history, there's a consequence, there's a future, there's a vision. Something in Israel that keeps taking me back, and I've written about it since. And that friend, I'm pleased to say, is in the audience today, John T. Feldman, who hates publicity, who hates being recognized. But yes. So I'm sorry, John T, for exposing you. I know you're a man in the shadows, a hidden hero. But we were taught by the Prophet, "Man lam yashkurin nas lam yashkurillah." Whosoever doesn't thank people doesn't thank God. So I have to be true to my own tradition. So that's why I was on October 7th, because I'd been exposed to it. But why October 7th and what's happened since is the following. On the eve of October 7th, what we were doing was organizing a conference that included delegations and representation from Indonesia, Bahrain, UAE, Turkey, the US, both the Senate and the House, 21 hedge funds from New York committed to putting private investment to build infrastructure projects for the I2U2 idea. What's I2U2 and why is October 7th relevant to that? I2U2 was an idea that came from His Highness, the President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, God preserve him. And his idea was, that the I2 is India and Israel, U2 is the US and the UAE, an infrastructure project that connects manufacturing in India that goes through the UAE and Arab countries into Israel and over to the US across the sea routes. The gathering that involved such a high level from the Arab and Muslim countries, as well as US political representation and financial investment, garnered for October 10th. The previous week, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia spoke about normalization. All of that led to a mood that Iran and its ally Hamas felt the need to disrupt. So for us, the consequence of October 7th is the following. The heinous cruelty and the evil of Hamas, the mass rapes and the mass killings and the mass hostage taking insult us as Muslims, insult our own tradition, and insult the region, because that ugliness is not Arab ugliness. That is not the way of the Arabs. Another reason why October 7th matters to us is that has to end. That barbaric, cruel behavior towards our Jewish neighbors, our Jewish cousins, has to end. And for us who are not Jewish, those of us who are not Jewish, and I think the UAE is important in this, and I'll end my answer on this, is just if you know, where in Egypt or in Jordan, they've had peace with Israel, but it was what we can call a cold peace. The UAE and Bahrain and the Moroccans in particular, these three countries, have gone towards a warm people-to-people peace, to the point that there are millions of Israelis that have now gone to Dubai. Why is this important? It's important because I'm not an Emirati, but I genuinely think Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's vision was to break the back of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas by saying that you can no longer play that game. Are you on the side of Israel? If you are, you're kind of, outside the fold. And if you are not on the side of Israel, then you're with us. So no amount of appeasing the fascism of the Muslim Brotherhood could be accepted in the Gulf by allowing the Brotherhood to use the Israel issue. So I think it's on the basis of that the Abraham Accords was built, continues to thrive, and I think October 7th was a direct attack on that vision by taking so many Jewish people hostage and killing so many innocent lives. And that's why I think the October 7th consequences resonate so much with us.
Yeah, and I want to speak more broadly about Abraham Accords and the positive regional developments, but I'm focusing specifically on the whole Israel-Palestine issue and the conflict and resolving that and the conclusions that people have.
You're trying to resolve it?
Well, isn't that what this is all about?
It needs a lot of more efforts.
A lot of people after October 7th, the paradigm, they realize that the paradigm we're laboring under, something has to shift, something's got to give. A lot of communities that were attacked, for example, were peaceniks in the south. They were people that deeply, passionately believed in the two-state solution and felt deeply betrayed. So in terms of that context, in terms of the vision for resolving this issue, what are some of the conclusions that you've had in the aftermath of October 7th?
Well, let me start with, I'm proud to be from country UAE, a country that few hours after the 7th of October genocide against the humanity, and it wasn't just against Israel, that happened, my country condemned it. It's because it's a clear message against the humanity. That genocide, it was against Muslim. Hamas did kidnap Muslims. It kidnapped Arab. It kidnapped Jews. It kidnapped Christians. And even atheists. Kidnapped all. Hamas' message was against all, including the Palestinians themselves, by doing so. And my country has a clear morals and values when it comes to this. We stand against all type of terrorism. And there is no justification for kidnapping an 8-month-old baby kafir from his mom. Nothing can justify that. No cause, no reason gives you the right to kidnap an 8-month-old baby. And we still, up to this point, pray for the safety of that baby, which nothing can explain to us. Why is that baby still a hostage? Why was he taken? Why is he's still a hostage? Also, I'm proud to be from a country that actually banned Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is the armed forces of Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood are the vision, the manifesto of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all form of terrorism in the Middle East. All form of terrorism, that's where it started. And Hamas is the armed forces of it. Up to this stage, up to this point, in United Kingdom, Muslim Brotherhoods are not banned. In fact, they developed their system and manners in a way that they have a charity organization such as Islamic Relief and others, where they support terrorism in the Middle East, but they take the funds from the people in Birmingham and other areas in UK. That is the crystal clear message right at the start. Ban the Muslim Brotherhood, and antisemitism, it's not an opinion. It's a crime. Do not treat anti-Semitism as an opinion. It's a crime. And that's how we treat it. After the 7th of October, we can no longer discuss, from my humble perspective, a one-state solution, a two-state solution, or a three-state solution. If you wanted a two-state solution, Gaza up to the 6th of October or the 7th of October morning wasn't an example of a state. But in that state, while countries like us and others in the Middle East, we were planning to reach all the way to the moon or to the Mars, and we sent our students all the way to various universities around the world, including UK. They learned, they came back, they became scientists. We reached the Mars. Proud to say that. But while we were doing this, others were digging tunnels to kidnap an 8-month-old baby. Two different visions in the Middle East. 7th of October. After that, you cannot discuss the two-state or one-state or three-state. It was a three states already. Israel, the West Bank with the PLO running alone, absolutely opposite and they don't recognize or recommend Hamas on the other side, and Hamas does not recommend them. So that was a three-state if you're looking for three-state. And there was a two-state if you're looking for two-state. One way of thinking of this, maybe all these solutions doesn't work. Maybe we need to come up with something absolutely new, different. Well, maybe not asking Trump for this. Maybe he has a perspective, but we need people who can search more into this. And the best way of looking into this, why still the education system in Gaza and the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as some many believe or call, and other places, the education system hates against Judaism, not Zionism, not Israel, but Judaism, which means right now you're sitting there. If someone is educated in Gaza, comes to this platform right now, sees you as an enemy, not a friend, not a person that deserves life, just for being a Jew. That education system, even if you're going to give a state today, or you're going to have a peace, if the education system carries on, we're going to have another 7th of October in a few years' time, or another genocide. So the revising and changing the educational system or the culture of hate or racism towards the others is where we should start. Is the start conversation rather than the two-state solution.
So this is something that I wanted to pick up on with you, Ed, and we were discussing this briefly on the phone earlier this week, because it's interesting. Amjad said that what's taught is not just, hatred of Israel per se, it's actually hatred of Judaism. Isn't one of the key points that really needs to be a paradigm shift that we see in the Muslim and Arab world is understanding actually that the two are deeply intertwined, that you open the Bible, it's so much of it is about the Jewish people and their connection with the land and God giving it to them, which also both of you talk about, exists within it. There is that tradition within Islam as well and in the Quran. Do you think that this is a critical component of making people more literate on that deep connection between Jewish people and Judaism and the land?
That goes in two ways. The first way in which that goes is, and I'm sorry to be so blunt, but I think that's necessary, is, whenever John T and I have been in Israel, it always seems as though Tel Aviv is seen as, this is the non-religious city, and if you want to do religion, you go to Jerusalem. And I often wear a fedora hat, the black fedora hats, because it's cold in the winter in Israel. And if I'm in Jerusalem, I get a degree of warmth and welcome and recognition and nodding of the head. And I am in Tel Aviv, same outfit, I get an entirely different vibe. And I think therein lies the problem, which is we cannot, I'm afraid, have justification of the existence of Israel based merely on archaeology. While it's undeniable, whether it's the coins or whether it's the excavation or whether it's the architecture that's becoming more and more prominent, that there was thousands of years of 3,500 years plus of Jewish presence, the real argument, and I'm sorry, it's not what Lapid says. Every time I hear Lapid speaking here, he talks about the Holocaust. The Holocaust arguably was an outcome of the lack of the existence of the State of Israel. But the Holocaust is not the justification for the State of Israel. The State of Israel is there because God guided Moses and Joshua out of the land of Egypt, from the tyranny of Pharaoh, to go and worship God freely in the land of Jacob, the land of Yaqub. And that we read in the Quran, Ya qawm idkhulu al-ardh al-muqaddasata allati kataba Allahu lakum. My friend Rick Sofer and I compare notes on this often. So I think that's the Quranic verse. So I think that's the first component, that Israelis have to recognize that their land certificate comes from God, and make that argument unashamedly. But that requires Israelis to return to God. Thank you, but I just think it's the truth, and there's no other way around it. Israelis have to return to God to justify, their existence and their prosperity, and the many miracles that Iran lobs rockets at them and they survive again and again. So I think you all understand what I'm getting at on the Israel side. Once we have that genuine recognition in Israeli society that it is a country founded on faith and scripture, then what you have is the language with which to speak to the rest of the region. Because even an Arab atheist will say, Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow. Even an Arab atheist, after he or she sneezes, will say, Alhamdulillah. Even an Arab atheist, when they say goodbye to you, will say, Allah yubarik fikum. It's part of Arab culture. It is what it is. Whereas when Israelis adopt that language, when Jews adopt that language in talking to the rest of their neighbors, 500 million Sunni Arabs, you'll see that suddenly Muslims will realize the truth. That is, these are the children of Israel, the children of Yaqub. There's a Jabal Musa in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia. These are children who are coming home. And they're welcome back. And I think that is the ultimate. By the way, what is Zionism? Zionism is predicated on Judaism. I find it bizarre. People say, I'm a Zionist, I'm not a Jew. It doesn't work like that. You've got to understand the supposition there is, Mount Zion is a holy mountain representing Jerusalem, and the Jewish return is about returning to Jerusalem. So I think that is fundamental in order for Israel to thrive. And just one last point, and I'll end this. And I've said this before, and I know people disagree with me, but I think stating the truth is much more important. Between the left wing in Israel negating their own religion and therefore by extension other religions, and the right wing so focused on Judaism that they don't have time to study Islam or Arabic culture, Israel's very existence is under threat, because Israel's existence is linked to the divine, and that divine, the children of Ismail or Ishmael, are part of that divine. God also, yes, the covenant according to the Bible is with Isaac, but God promises Ishmael, even in the Bible, many nations and great empires. Right? So I think it's important to reconnect that, and once you reconnect that, you understand why we have something called the Abraham Accord and why we can expand on that. I'm sorry to give you a long answer, but I think it's necessary to understand.
Well, no, it's interesting because really, for Israel's existence, its leaders have largely spoken in a very Western, secular, liberal, democratic tone in terms of justifying our existence and all the rest of it. But we forget that we're dealing with a deeply religious region. That's the conflict in which Israel's fighting. And I heard someone point out to me recently that actually two of the things that's deeply respected in the region, the Arab world, is people that invoke the name of God, and people and countries that will show uncompromising strength. And those are two things that perhaps at times Israel maybe hasn't always been excelled in. And I wonder, Amjad, do you agree with that? Do you think that if Israel's leaders started to speak and justify her right to be there and her existence and everything in a more spiritual, religious tone, that would somehow shift opinion in the region? Do you agree with Ed on that?
This is not two Jews, three opinions, You don't want to get that here. I guarantee you. Can.
One thing I can agree with you on this is I think Donald Trump speaks very fluently the Middle Eastern language at this stage. Many can stand opponent to this perspective and opinion. I think what's really important that we look into the future of this. the current moment needs someone to shake and move things around. And I think when Donald Trump spoke about the plan of his, I think the main he spoke in a real estate mind person rather than any, and it's actually very smart in doing so, because he raised the bar for people to come to the table, to start thinking. Well, listen, if we're not going to look for solutions, someone else will do so. And I think this sends a very good signal to the rest of the Middle East, where start looking for a solution. And looking for a solution, there is no perfect solution in the Middle East. There is impossible to have a solution in the Middle East. There is a lot of things happening, even away from Israel, on the borders of Israel. You removed Assad, Israelis, they're happy, the rest of the Middle East is happy, and then the former Al-Qaeda is in the leading the country. And then now we're waiting how they're going to explain themselves and how they're going to be modernized. We are in the Middle East where Al-Qaeda can be modernized and can lead. Where a person that you know his name today is Mohammed Jolani, tomorrow his name is Ahmed Shara. It's a whole different. So that's the Middle East that you have to face. But then this is the question that you should ask. If Syria, for example, with a former Al-Qaeda, or right now Ahmed Shara, and look, the Soviet, when they start, Gorbachev, when they start changing, when there was a stage for a peace and someone is putting their hand there, it's your choice to shake it or not. But to give the chance, it's also your choice. When it comes to, if the Syrian, for example, Jolani puts his hand for normalization with Israel, and there are suggestions that they might do so, who is going to be on this other side to shake his hand? And how much can you trust the Islamists? And how much have you built for that moment? Your society, your community, and so on. These questions exist, and I don't think that anybody has a straight answer for this at this stage, at this point. But those are very important. Also, what's important is the fact that a lot of countries, European countries, when the 7th of October happened, yes, the darkness in the Middle East existed. And some of you think that it's quite dark. And then you go in the streets of London, there is a chant of hate and racism towards a lot of Jewish community. There is not even one protest, shamefully, not even one protest raised the picture of the babies who were killed on that 7th of October. I stand firmly and strongly with every child in Gaza and whoever is murdered by the Israelis or any other side, or even the Hamas. But I also stand with baby Kafir, and I want his freedom. That's justice, and that's freedom, and that's morality. But if you have not raised the picture of baby Kafir in any of your protests, you have no right to tell me that you are there to stand for the right of others, or you're standing for humanity. You're not. And yes, you do not know nothing about humanity, and no, you do not care about the rest of the Middle East. Because if you did so, and you wanted to do so, okay, there is a very simple test for you, and it shows the ignorance of the people who are protesting on the street. The fact that on the 15th April 2023, Muslim Brotherhood-led army in Sudan start airstriking the opponent of theirs, but in the same time as they were doing so, they killed, up to the point I'm speaking, over 45,000 children, women, bombarded hospitals, mosques, schools, everything. How many protests did you see in the street of London supporting the people of Sudan? How many charities is going to those children? Oh, wait for the children, you don't know about them. Those children, according to the United Nations, 5 million in Sudan are starving. 200,000 of those children, they might die by the end of 2025. How much do you know about them? So why not even a post, not even a protest about those? So is it about humanity, or is it the media? Whatever the media tells you, then only then it rings the bell of yours, and then you start thinking morally and so on. So are you a hostage of the propaganda of the media or the propaganda of Hamas, or are you a freedom fighter, but it only if it only fits you outside your working time, and they only protest on Saturday, Sundays. They never protest on Monday because it takes their salaries or work wages.
Well, this actually touches on the next thing I want to talk about, which is a bit closer to home, which is exactly as you say, the protests, or lack of protests in some cases, that we've been seeing in the streets of Britain and Europe. As you said, there's the double standards. There's conflicts with far higher death tolls, and yet we don't hear anything about them. Similarly, at the same time, before Israel even finished getting all the bodies and fighting against Hamas, we saw on the streets of this very city people coming to celebrate what Hamas did on the very day of October 7th.
In Edgware Road.
In Edgware Road, and many of the streets in London. We learned recently about, I think it was the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, right, who are already organising as the news was unfolding on the day. And we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism in Europe, Britain, people starting to question Jewish future here. Ed, I wondered if you could share some insight into why are we seeing this now? What do you put this rise down to?
I think it's just worth all of us for a moment recognizing the fact that after October 7th, as you rightly identify and as Amjad's just spoken so eloquently about, the condemnation of October 7th as a terrorist act came from Reem al-Hashimi, who's a member of the United Arab Emirates government at the United Nations. And for taking that stance, the UAE came under a lot of flack among some of its Arab and Muslim countries. But Reem, a hijab-wearing, eloquent member of the Emirati ruling elite, took that stance. Now, I, as a Muslim, felt very much proud and at home with that sentiment that Reem al-Hashimi, Her Excellency Reem al-Hashimi, put out there. Then I looked around in my own country and saw that not a single Muslim-led organization had that same moral courage to say October 7th was a terrorist act. We just didn't have anyone in this country say that. Worse, many of those organizations led by Islamists, I don't mean Muslims, ordinary Muslims, I mean those who have a political project, a Marxism-influenced revolutionary ideology exported out of Iran and out of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat Islami from the subcontinent and other organizations. They then campaigned at the general election with hint, hint, nudge, nudge, we're pro-Hamas, we're pro-Palestine, and we're kind of anti-Israel, and if you support us, then you will have a government in place that will be more pro-Palestine, by implication anti-Israel. So I think this is a real issue in this country, in France, in Holland, in Belgium, in Germany, in Austria, and increasingly in Italy and Spain. So the question is, why? To my mind, there are two reasons. One, that a large amount of Muslims who have migrated to the West, and they're absolutely right to migrate, there's nothing wrong with immigration, and I'm sorry this goes out against the kind of mood out there, but legal immigration from people and countries that are loyal to these countries and their ideals, who recognize the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic contribution through Andalusia and Sicily to the formation of the modern West, are welcome. And Islam and Muslims, as much as Israel in the Middle East, are at the forefront of defending Western civilization. And if you disagree with me, by all means, can take me up during the Q&A. So I think that's the first point to acknowledge. But with that immigration that is supposed to be legal and supposed to be pro-West, we've made the mistake of letting into Britain people who are against Britain, people who are against America, and therefore against Israel. And I think that cohort on university campuses over the last 20 years or so has radicalized an entire generation of Muslims in the West and made them against their own countries, against Arab governments, and yes, against Israel. So that far-right ideology from Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt has now gained a serious foothold in many of the countries, especially in the UK, by the way. As Amjad rightly says, the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, its armed forces are banned in the UAE, in Mecca, Medina, and elsewhere, but thrive here in England in our midst. Hence your need for security outside for this event. Hence the need for CST. You shouldn't need either of those two things in a free country, but that's where we are. And the second facet is this, that the Islamist far right the Greens, if you like, have found common cause with your far left, the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the Labour Party. And it is a wing of the Labour Party, and in America we see that wing with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and others who have that very communist Marxist worldview of self-hatred, despising Judaism and Jewishness as Karl Marx did. Remember his book in 1863 on the Jewish question. It was the first book to legitimize Jew hatred because Marx had given them license as a Jew to do that. Yeah. That far left influence continues to fester both in America, but especially here now in England and further into Europe. That alliance that brought about the Iranian Revolution, Khomeini was in bed with the Iranian left. That alliance that brought in place Gaza, Hamas was in bed with the Palestinian left. But the problem is the leftists just don't learn that both in Iran and in Gaza, upon winning, the Islamists threw leftists off the highest buildings, removed them, and they took power. So that lesson is not learned, and today what we see is what you call the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, MEND, 5 Pillars, the Muslim Council of Britain, the Muslim Association of Britain, the Islamic Society of Britain, the UK Islamic Mission. I know we're being recorded and they'll probably want to sue me, so we may want to take this bit out. But these many names are the essence of the same Islamist Muslim Brotherhood mood music to which terrorists and suicide bombers dance. And that's why you have an anti-Semitism problem. That's why you have large numbers of people on the street. It's the red-green alliance, the far left and the far right. And just one other point, if I may, those of us who are on the political center and the center right, we ought not to applaud ourselves too much, because we now have a serious problem on the right with its old-fashioned anti-Semitism, and you see that articulated now in America by Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk, and a whole host of others. So whatever starts in America, I'm afraid, isn't far from coming here. So we ought to be very careful that this ugly beast, the oldest hatred, isn't just on the Islamist right, but doesn't find expression here in the British centre right.
Absolutely, it is also it's a surprising concern, but we didn't see that coming. But it is a concern, absolutely. Just in the interest of time, I do want to move on to some other topics as well, because I also have to take questions and to really touch on some of the positive developments that we're seeing as well, and hopefully can build upon. You touched on how right after October 7th, a representative from the UAE came out and condemned what Hamas had done. And this is one of the interesting things. A lot of people were asking in the days, weeks and months after October 7th, will the Abraham Accords last? Is this going to upend everything? And of course they have lasted. Despite, and as just as Israel's war may be, we can't ignore the fact that, when you have a lot of people and a lot of Arabs dying, it's going to create a lot of tension among Arab governments, even that are looking for positive relations with Israel. So Amjad, can you help us understand what is it? Why have the Abraham Accords lasted despite a lot of pressure to try and upend it?
I think the Abrahamic Accord actually won this. And the 7th of October happened because there is a lot of success that the extremists in the Middle East, they cannot handle. And they know a lot more success in the Abrahamic Accord and more countries in joining the Abrahamic Accord is a failure for those extremist and radical groups. And it's also success for the countries who want to thrive and so on, number one. Number two, if you care about your friend or your neighbor, you actually tell them the truth. And when they're wrong, you tell them wrong. And when they're right, you tell them right. So as we trade in with the state of Israel, over 3 billion worth of trades, and he has reached more than the numbers that those were the last numbers I revised, and more than 300 companies from Israel exporting, importing, or functioning in UAE. Over 106 flights goes back and forth from UAE to Israel, and those have not stopped. Can be decreased, but it has not stopped. That tells you anything. It tells you Abrahamic Accord is thriving and it has not stopped. When the 7th of October happened, they wanted us to close the embassy. They want us to stop the relation and so on. But instead, we thought in that darkness we can be the light. And yes, we were indeed. in a sense that because of that relationship, that we can have the conversation and a dialogue with the Israelis where they allow us and others on the borders of Gaza. We can build tents, we can build places for a humanitarian aid, and because of that, 40,000 tons of humanitarian aid did reach Gaza. And at the same time, because of that communication that exists, more than 210 of the Gazan children who suffer from cancer, they were, because of the communication that exists between UAE and Israel on this film, they were taken from Israel Raman airport all the way in UAE, where they're getting treated rather than being as a human shield for Hamas, for example, or not being treated and suffering under this very critical situation and condition. So if it wasn't for the Abrahamic Accord, those children would not be treated right now, and they would be suffering, and some of them, they probably die because there is not much of medicine and various things for them. So Abrahamic Accord tells you in that darkness we are the hope. And this is where the European Parliament or the British Parliament should speak to the public about. You say dialogue is not good with the Israelis, and you call the names of all that Zionist and all those names and terminology they like to use. But we proved it. We're Arab, we're Muslim, and we actually do put statement condemns Israel in various occasions. Because if you care about your neighbors, you tell them when they're wrong and you tell them when they're right. While we trade in, we also condemn you for doing this mistake. You can do this right, you can do this better. And while we condemn you, you still brought Lapid, the opposition, to hear him. We still brought the head of the Druze in society, community in Israel to come and meet the leadership and be heard and spoken to and so on. If anything, we're saying here, we can overcome any challenges through a dialogue, through a conversation, through a peaceful manner, through a cooperation, through supporting the similarities, a lot of similarities that we have, and we can overcome those with understanding rather than using guns against each other.
How close do you think Israel is to a deal with the Saudis?
Ask a Saudi.
You must have some Saudi friends.
I do. We're actually all very, very, very good friends. Very good friends.
And so what do you think?
I think right
I'm
now...
just trying to avoid the answer. Why don't you let me...
Since he's asking, I think right now the main solution is we set the example. Others can put their own condition to follow differently in a different path. But in the end of that path is peace. In the same time, there is someone raising the bar, be it from all sides, including Trump.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to bring people into the table, to make both sides to give in into. Maybe here on the left, we need some people to give, let's say, a land. On this, the other side, a political resolution, an election, and a re-election, and a change, and so many. So raising the bar doesn't mean always in the Bedouins manner and in the real estate manner. It doesn't mean that's it, this is the top of it. Yeah. It means come, let's sit on the table and negotiate and talk.
And lastly, my question to you, Ed, before I then take it out to the floor for questions. You were saying to me earlier when we were chatting a few days ago that you were asking a really poignant question that I hadn't really thought about before, which is Britain has a lot of allies in the Arab world. What have they done to try and promote Israel, relations with Israel and the rest of the Arab world to try and build on the Abraham Accords? Doesn't seem like they've done all that much.
No, I mean, the fact that you found that question startling is part of the problem, right? Yeah. You come from a prominent political family. And those of you who have political ties here and have funding for political parties, I mean, it's a serious question, Ollie, that why do we always expect the Americans to constantly do the heavy lifting? And then we wonder why we have a president that wants to disengage with the world, because it's too heavy, the lifting. NATO, Ukraine, Korea, China, the South China Sea, Latin America, the list is long. Britain has the Commonwealth, and it's a massive platform. Britain has excellent convening power around the world. Britain's king is respected around the world, and British politicians and its institutions are held in awe. And yet, and I'm sorry to civil servants here, the Foreign Office hasn't done an iota to advance. It's not really about Israel, It's bigger than Israel. It's about Britain. It's about America. It's about a safer world for Jewish people, and where the Jewish people are safe, others are safe. The Jewish people famously, canaries in a coal mine. I can't find a single civilization in history that has turned against its Jewish people and then thrived. Be it the ancient Egyptians, be it the Romans, be it the Ottomans, be it the Spaniards, the Andalusians. Every time there's intolerance towards these people, you people, the descendants of prophets, something changes. And Churchill was obsessed with quoting Disraeli, the Lord treats the nations as the nations treat Israel, or treat the people of Israel. And I think there's a divine truth in that. You can do your materialist Marxist analysis as much as you want, but there's something here that you've got to follow. And Britain is now found wanting in this pursuit of bringing a three-state solution, a two-state solution, or greater peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And a lot of it is to do with the fact that Britain doesn't want to engage in this area. The British Civil Service have a bias that is stuck in 1947. Britain has guilt in relation to the Balfour Accords, and Britain feels as though being seen to be pro-Israeli is somehow part of the problem. But I've got news for you. The current administration in America will not tolerate that kind of retreat from the world, from Britain. The current occupant of the White House has a bust of Churchill behind him. And the current occupant of the White House, as things stand today, is not fully appreciative of the British ambassador there. One Peter Mandelson, who's a large part of the problem, by the way. This kind of... So all of those issues ought to be borne in mind, and those of you who have political ties should, in fact, must put greater pressure that one way to get closer to America and to Trump, because that's the talk of the town, is to come to Israel's aid and come early and bring Pakistan, Indonesia, Brunei. I mean, you find whichever member of the Commonwealth or the wider British soft power, and they ought to be brought.
You need a lot of work for Pakistan.
Brought to the table, whoever it is that they bring. Indeed, but on the Abraham Accords, I just want to say very quickly, Ollie, is that not only did the Abraham Accords last the test of war, and my friend Mohammed Al-Khaja, the ambassador to Israel, reminds me often that the Emirati embassy actually expanded in trade volume, in security conversations, and the other areas of collaboration. So I think there, as my brother Amjad said, what we have there is a great example for the Saudis and other countries to emulate. But that requires, as you rightly identify, Ollie, Britain and other countries backing this process. Because, on the one side you have Iran, whichever country has become closer to Iran, literally the lights go off. Damascus previously, Yemen, Lebanon. There are other countries in Iraq, despite having all the wealth. And yet countries that have become closer to Israel and by extension the West, their lights go on. And we've got to prove that not only do their lights go on, the lights stay on and become brighter. And I think Britain has an important role to play in that process.
Absolutely. Okay, well, now I'd like to take questions from the audience.
Thank you.
So I think maybe we'll take a couple of questions at a time, just so we can be efficient with this. So let's start off. Who's manning the mics? Okay, so we'll start off with a question over here, lady in the blue, and then the chap over there, glasses. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. And what leverage, if any, do the Abraham Accord countries, Emirates in particular, have over Qatar and its hosting of Hamas, and in particular the release of the remaining hostages?
Okay, and the gentleman over there.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and speaking. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight. My question is mainly about UNRWA and the future of UNRWA under increasing Israeli pressure. There's about 500,000+ children who receive an UNRWA education. Unfortunately, this UNRWA education is actually a jihadist education. So if we are to shape the future of the Levant, what can we actually do about UNRWA? Should it be dissolved? Should it be reformulated? Should it be rebranded? What pressure can be put on it by Arab governments to actually change the way it deals with children so as not to indoctrinate them into supporting terrorist regimes?
So, Amjad, can we start with you in the issue of leverage?
I start with the
You prefer to start with the other
if
one?
you don't
Okay,
mind.
UNRWA, sure.
Start from there. When it comes to UNRWA, I think the United Nations in general has failed many states, has failed those brave women in Iran who fought against the regime. They were not given voices. And in regard to the United Nations again, and many organizations that work under the United Nations, I'm sure you know how many refugees that exist around the world right now. There is 123 million, according to the UN, in 126 places around the world. So we're speaking about 100 million refugees, and they are not being given a certain education and so on. And the system failed them. Mm. The United Nations needs a review, and there is many countries who are asking for this. And UNRWA and others are part of this. Yes, there was an investigation, and there were members of this organization and others in Gaza and other places where they were actually previously worked with a certain terrorist group in the Middle East, and one of those, Hamas. And Hamas, Hamas members, whatever dress code they get in the front of them, they wear it, be it press, be it UN, anything, whatever. Do not be surprised when it comes to the Hamas. A solution for that, I think one of the countries that can approach this is the US. I think what US can decide, it will affect the rest of the countries. But again, for the sake of a case being proven, I think those who break the rules and break the regulation and bring those children into danger, they should be brought to justice. And the evidence should be provided more and more and more, and never give up. Be it online, be it on the courts. Well, I can't say international court. They haven't bring Kim Jong or the Islamic regime of Iran to the ICC, but I don't know. They think it's a democratic. Well, North Korea does call itself
Democratic Republic of North Korea.
It's by the United Nations.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Ed, do you want to reflect on both questions briefly?
Not really. Simply because you reflect on Qatar and you get into trouble. They hack your emails, they get into your WhatsApp, and I just think you bring more harm than good. Other than to say that whenever the topic of Qatar comes up in Washington DC, everyone's on the defensive because Qatar pays for the US armed forces being based there, and it's their strategy that you make yourself a US arms forces host and makes it difficult for others in the region to shut down operations that you're launching into the wider region. But I'll just say this without being, without putting oneself and all of us in any great harm. The fact that I have to speak like this tells you a lot, right? This is the power of this small island. Is the following: that Qatar 2 months ago was weaker than it is today because of the successes that Israel and other countries in the region had advanced. But what's changed? What's changed is the fact that Qatar now has a major ally in an important country from which it can prove its model. And its model is now going to be upheld by Damascus. So Hamas may have been relatively obliterated out of Gaza, but I'm afraid to tell you that Hamas now has a strong base in Damascus. I lived in Syria for 2 years and visited often until the Arab Spring. And I refuse to retract my thinking on this until and unless we have answers from someone who called himself a Golani or Jolani from the Golan Heights. He wasn't born in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is not Syrian territory, according to where we are in reality now. And yet he called himself Jolani, as in reminding everyone that I'm going to liberate the Golan Heights. Now, this man is now in power in Damascus. So he hasn't told us, and my old boss, Tony Blair, and others are busy kind of warming him up to the world. He hasn't told us where he stands on 9/11. He hasn't told us how many Americans he's killed in Iraq and in Syria and where he stands on that. He hasn't told us whether he recognizes his Jewish neighbor state. And he hasn't told us whether his armed forces that are composed of global jihadists will now be sent back to their countries, and his Syrian armed forces will be just that, Syrian. And in the absence of giving us those answers, and fifthly, whether his country will be a literalist Sharia-based Islamist state, or there will be a moderate Arab Muslim country following the route of the UAE and others, I don't think we should trust what's going to come out of Damascus. And what's in Damascus is a Qatari project backed by other countries in the region. And that's what worries me, and that's where we're heading towards. And I think we should all pay attention to this. Unless those questions are asked, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Yes, lady over here. And then we'll go to the gentleman behind you.
Hi, on the subject of education, obviously that takes a long time. It's very, very painstaking work.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
She
And I
came
know
2
we're
hours
fighting-
away from here.
Yeah, and I know from, trying to combat antisemitism, how painstaking obviously it is. So we read with interest what, in fact, both you and Ed write, but down on the ground in the Middle East, how much progress are you making with changing the narrative?
And we'll just take a question from the chat behind as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What have we done wrong as a global Jewish community that we can't promote Jews in a global sense, and we also can't respond appropriately to the kind of threats and the way that the anti-Jewish movement globally has actually treated us? So, and how can we change that going forward?
I think those questions are completely connected to each other. So
The second question, you should ask a rabbi about it.
it's good to have an outside perspective, though.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't see what others from the outside can see.
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to the first question again, the progress when it comes to the generation in the Middle East, I think there is a lot has changed. And one thing that I can tell you, in 2023 or 2001 and 2023, 2003, sorry. In 2003, you open the TV, it's Al Jazeera on, and the rest of the generation getting the news and the perspective and the opinion of what's happening through Al Jazeera. In 2025, 2024, 2023, the young generation, when you tell them there is something happening in Israel or Gaza, they go to TikTok, they go to Snapchat, and they will zoom in, they find the map with who is who and what's happening live streaming. At the same time, they got to know what the Hamas committed from a crime and genocide through the Facebook streaming live their crimes. So you can no longer lie to that generation. And a generation that grew through Al Jazeera TV is very different than a generation that has access to data, has access to AI, has access to TikTok, social media, X and others, Instagram and other social media platform. It's very different. And yes, there is a lot of progress to the point where we have in Israelis and the Palestinians and Arabs from various backgrounds are joining and then speaking to each other online and having a conversation, correcting each other, to a point where you find another fellow Emirati here right in the front in the Abrahamic Accords group in UK, to a point where you find Joff, did I get it right? Joff, Jonathan or Joff, there is. Coming all the way to Abu Dhabi, and then in DC we met twice and speaking about the Abrahamic Accord and how we can connect more and more to various people from the Middle East and so on, to a point where you have 1 million Israelis visited last year UAE. they feel safe, they feel diversity, they feel the peace, the prosperity, they feel that they can have a dialogue, they can have a meal, they can open a business and so on. We did have the case of a rabbi being targeted by those criminals and those murderers, and they were a few hours later on brought to justice. Few hours, literally all the way in Turkey, they were brought to justice. That a system cares about humanity, and at the same time, few hours later, a member of the representative of the government went and visited the family and attended the funeral. That's another message there. And before yesterday actually, the wife of the rabbi returned to UAE to carry her life, and she's going to stay in UAE with her family, with her children who actually attend in a Jewish school in UAE. And at the same time, she will run the supermarket with her, which has a kosher supermarket in UAE. You feel safe, you feel that diversity, that's a new generation. And by the way, in the same time, we have another 200,000 Palestinians living side by side next to another 3,000 Jewish community that's actually, both of them are existing in UAE and they're thriving together. They deal in making businesses. We are the dialogue, we're making that happen, and it is possible, no matter what happens, no matter how much darkness is there. Yes, we are progressing, even if it's one person or two on this platform. That's enough to build hope for another 3, 4, 6, 7, 10 generation coming.
Ed, can I push you a little bit on the second person's question about, feel free to say, do you think there's anything strategically that we could be doing better as a Jewish community?
I think it's worth acknowledging that the many things you've got right first before we do the wrongs. So don't be so harsh on yourselves. You've survived.
Need a bit of Jewish guilt,
Yeah. I mean, look where you are look where you were supposed to be in the 1930s. Just think about that. I mean, who would have thought you are where you are now? In many ways, you haven't been stronger globally than in the times of Solomon. And there's no other parallel that you've been so strong, so robust, so spread out, and so influential. The one country that you call the Jewish state, Israel, has never been stronger in its history. And yes, the paradox of life, the Hegelian dialectics as such, that there's also antagonism. So we should address some of that. But I just want to acknowledge the greatness of this. The fact that 300 of you have come out here tonight on a cold night is testament to that greatness. So thank you for being here. We appreciate your time. But to take on your question, I have a particular bee in my bonnet about this, as you can tell, which is I just think Jewish people should be more proud and assertive about their Jewishness. Now stop hiding it, stop being afraid. You are descendants of the greatest lineage, prophethood. We honor those prophets. We have Sadat, as we say, from the line of Ismail and Saleh and our last Abrahamic Arab prophet Muhammad, and we're proud of that. We have, to our count, at least 5 Arab prophets. You have hundreds. The Quran says thousands of Hebrew prophets. Well, where is that? Where is the mark of that in your conduct? Well, we see it in the kindness. We see it in your love for your scriptures. We see it in your philanthropy. And we see it in America and the influence that you have in the cultural and the architectural and the financial and the entertainment and the political space and the culture of asking questions. All of that is positive. But if there was one thing that you and your children ought to invest greater time in, and I think my friend Rick Sofa's yielded great results from that investment, is to better understand your Arab and Muslim neighbors, linguistically, culturally, and it's not an Ashkenazi Sephardi thing. Let the Sephardis do that. We'll just stay close to, Germany, and we're not. I mean, you shouldn't. If you return home, which you have, the Middle East is your home, behave like it. Behave like you're at home and get to know your neighbors. The Arabs have a beautiful saying, ad-dar thumma jar, the neighbor first and then the house. So get to know your neighbors would be my great appeal to you. But I just want to say one last thing in the progress on the narrative, and I won't take long, I promise, that 10 years ago, there were just a couple of us here in England trying to amplify the narrative that that was 10 years ago. Today, you have a crown prince in Saudi Arabia who's busy Ron Dermer has this great saying, Ron Dermer says that MBS is an Emirati in the Saudi system. That might have gone over many of your heads, but it's just the Emirati culture of innovation, of forward thinking, reaching Mars, AI, looking to the future. MBS has got that, but he's in a Saudi system, so he's got to carry the difficulties of his previous generations. Now, he is focused on building better ties with global Jewish community as well as in Israel, because his private polling inside his country suggests that his population, as late as October 7th, were not against Jews nor Israel. He saw next door the Louvre Museum that celebrates Hebrew culture, the Abrahamic family house, that the synagogue was the way he wants to take his country. So the UAE has proven a model that he and his population then wanted to advance. October 7th was a smack in the face for that vision. But it was just that, now that they will come back, but the polling in his country shows that there's a greater amount of radicalization in his population after October 7th. So he has to bow to that. But why am I saying all of this? I say all of this that, yes, at ground level, education systems in Morocco, in the UAE, in Bahrain, and in Saudi Arabia have changed. And that is, I think, a phenomenal achievement. In Indonesia, the largest Muslim majority country with over 250 million people, has changed. That was not the case 10 years ago. And I see you're seeing that with things that my brother Amjad was saying, but also what you're going to see in the coming months and years in Palestine or Palestinian territories itself. You will see that change. So I think there's everything to hope for. Moses, when he was asked whether we should live or die, he said, always choose life. And our Prophet Muhammad said, always try to be optimistic. Al-mu'minu mutafa'il, have optimism. So look on the bright side of life.
Well, that was... Well, Ed, that was said so brilliantly, and that's why I said, science, it's important for us to hear from an outside perspective what science we ourselves don't see. And I've often thought recently that part of the reason for Holocaust denial is people simply can't get their heads around. You've suffered so much, and yet, as you said, 1930s, look where the Jewish people are today. How can you bounce back so quickly? It just can't be possible that you suffer that much. But the truth is actually, no, it is. It's through, we really have done, but it's through that resilience, through connecting to our faith and to our story and belief in the future. And so, just as you said, expressing that more proudly and openly and confidently, and also with a spirit of communication and God, of course, but also wanting to understand the other and understand our Arab and Muslim brothers. I think it's excellent advice, and really to both of you, Ed and Amjad, just thank you so much for all you do to not just promote peace and brotherhood, but also to give us as Jews encouragement that we really will one day see a world of reconciliation and peace.
The one thing I'd say, you've made me think about this. I've met Israeli friends on the political kind of centre-left or further along the spectrum who have reservations about God. They go to the UAE and they suddenly become more religious. So it's an interesting. They start saying inshallah, mashallah. So we help you, I think, return to your roots.
You do absolutely. We all help each other. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.